The price of Nintendo 64 games is going to crash in about 1 year's time. And that's what we're going to talk about in today's video. I have a whole spreadsheet presentation ready for you guys in just a little bit, but first let's talk about what's happening that is going to cause this decline in prices. And keep in mind that when I say this, I mean cartridge prices primarily. Complete in box will see effect, obviously. The sealed market is its own thing. It will largely be unaffected by this. So let's talk about what's happening. At the latest Nintendo Direct, Nintendo unveiled the Nintendo Switch Online Expansion Pack. Hey, the Expansion Pack, that's a pretty cool name. So what this means is you're going to be able to pay an additional fee on top of your already existing Nintendo Online membership, and with it, you're going to get access to play classic Nintendo 64 games and Sega Genesis games. And everything I'm saying does also relate to Sega Genesis cartridges, but it's going to hit N64 harder and more noticeably since the average price of your Mario game on N64 is quite propped up still. I actually just checked. The price of Mario Kart 64 on price charts is $34 US. So the higher the prices on these common games, the more noticeable the effects are going to be, which is why I'm talking about N64 primarily. So at the end of October, we're going to have access to play on the Nintendo Switch, classic N64 and Sega Genesis games. With the N64, it's these titles specifically: Mario Kart 64, Ocarina of Time, Star Fox, Mario Tennis, Super Mario 64. Lots of really good games are going to come to the Nintendo Switch Online. I expect it to sell very well. And what this directly means is that people, regular gamer consumers, no longer have a need to own original consoles, original hardware, original games in order to get their quick fix of Mario Kart 64, in order to experience Ocarina of Time on the Nintendo 64. What I see happening is the exact same thing that happened with the NES Mini when it came out and the Super Nintendo Mini when it came out. This Nintendo Switch Online package is the replacement for the N64 mini console. We will never get a Nintendo 64 mini. This announcement from Nintendo, for me, solidifies that. Nintendo obviously realizes the insane demand that an N64 mini would have based on the success of the Super Nintendo and NES mini. But what they also realized is they can sell infinite units of old Nintendo 64 games if they don't put it on a limited production basis by making a physical console. So now instead of selling however many units of the N64 mini, they can slowly keep introducing N64 games onto the Switch Online service, and maybe they'll have you pay $5 for an additional game one time. Maybe they'll have you pay $10 to get another game. Maybe certain months will have certain promotions. The point is, you can now have an infinite number of people subscribing and subscribing monthly, which will far outweigh any time of one-time payment model and the production costs of making an N64 mini. I truly believe we will not see one. So for all intents and purposes of this video, I am going to consider that Nintendo Switch Online is the N64 mini, and the effects of it will be extremely similar to what happened when we saw the Super Nintendo mini came out and the NES mini. And guess what happened when they came out? The prices of the games on those consoles tanked. And I put all of the data for the Super Nintendo Mini in a spreadsheet that I'm going to show you guys in just a second. But the big thing that a lot of people want to argue against or accept is that retro gaming on original hardware, buying cartridges, it is becoming more inconvenient to do this with each passing year. Even for myself, if I do retro gaming, I generally do it on an emulator. Playing on the actual physical original hardware is such a luxury to even be able to afford to do that, as well as incredibly inconvenient to have everything set up on an old CRT TV. Oh, maybe you're buying an HDMI upscaler, which is more money. It's basically the worst possible way to play retro games, but also the best, right? It's obviously also the most pure experience. So right now, if you want to go play Mario Kart 64, the most convenient way to do it would be to emulate it, right? And as easy as you or I make emulating seem, a lot of people simply don't know how to do it and simply do not do it. So for a lot of those people, they still will have to whip out their N64 and they might have to go buy a cartridge to do so. Now, what if I could tell those people that you no longer need to own all of this old hardware? You can simply buy a Switch Online membership and play Nintendo 64 games whenever you want. Hell, you can even play Mario Kart 64 with online. That is going to absolutely crater the demand from the casual crowd. And when we lose the entire casual crowd demand, prices are going to tank. And that's the basis of my argument right there. And now I'm actually going to show you guys the data of when the Super Nintendo Mini came out and what happened 1 year later and what happened 2 years later to the prices of all of the games that were included on that console. So here is the really cool spreadsheet I made the other night. And this is looking at the results of all of the games that were released on the Super Nintendo Mini after 1 year of release and after 2 years of release. All of the price data used here is taken from price charting historical data. So if you want to go ahead and fact check any of this, just go over to pricecharting.com and use their little graph feature. So the Super Nintendo Mini released September 2017. The prices in this column show the price of the cartridge when the Super Nintendo Mini was released. The numbers in this column show the prices September 2018. 1 full year later, and the numbers in this column show the prices 2 years later. This is our percent drop after 1 year, and this is our percent drop after 2 years. And I did stop the data here at September 2019 because in September 2020, we were in the middle of lockdown, stay-at-home culture, and you all know what happened then. We had an insane catalyst that led to all game prices going up. So really, September 2018, 2019 was where we had real data, and then we had a massive catalyst that ruins basically the whole data sample. So in doing this, the first thing I wanted to see is how have all Super Nintendo games fared over the same time span. So price charting also allows you to look at the entire index of Super Nintendo games. So this price here shows the average of all 800 games or whatever it tracks. And you can see that when the Super Nintendo Mini came out, $22.71 was the price of the average Super Nintendo game. 1 year later, the average barely saw any change. Now obviously we had games that went down a whole lot and we had games that went up a whole lot, resulting in this average change. But it wasn't like the whole market fell. So kind of interesting. And in 2 years, September 2019, you can see that there was actually already a heavy downwards trend in overall Super Nintendo games. Almost a 5% decrease across the entire index in only 2 years. So now over here in this leftmost column, we have all of the games released in the Super Nintendo Mini North American version. I currently have them filtered by the greatest percent loss they saw after the first year of release. So at the very top here, we can see Super Mario World at time of release was $16.78. 1 year later, it was $9.60. It lost 42% of its value from September 2017 to September 2018. And at the very bottom, the game that actually saw the least decrease was Super Ghouls and Ghosts, which only lost 3% over the first year, but then over a 2-year period, it did lose 18% of its original value. Over here in this right column, you can see that actually after the first year, Super Nintendo prices were starting to recover, at least on these specific games here. Of the games on the Super Nintendo Mini, not a lot of them continued to lose money year over year. But what this shows is that on average, 1 year after the Super Nintendo Mini released, all games that were released saw an average loss of 24% of their value. And you can see that after 2 years, it did get a little bit better, but they were still down 23.5% from when the Super Nintendo Mini released. And for extra data here and extra interest, I did look at some games that were not on the Super Nintendo Mini to see how they related. So over here with the games, I didn't put too much thought into it. I googled some wish lists of the Super Nintendo Mini and just picked some other super popular titles that could have appeared on it or that people would probably be interested in. And of these titles, interestingly, Super Mario All-Stars actually saw its value also plummet when the Super Nintendo Mini came out. Same with Donkey Kong Country 3 and 2. They all saw way more loss than any of the other games I pulled for this sample. Now, I don't know if that has to do with people emulating on the Super Nintendo Mini, but it's interesting to see, because if we take one like Final Fantasy II here, which lost 5% in the first year, versus its counterpart up here, Final Fantasy III, which saw a loss of 24%. So Final Fantasy III being on the Super Nintendo Mini versus Final Fantasy II not being on the Super Nintendo Mini, FF3 saw 20% more price loss than FF2 did, which I mean is already shown here in the averages being 24% versus 12%. Games that were not on the Super Nintendo Mini in this sample dropped half the percent of the games that were on the Super Nintendo Mini. Which brings me back here to my main point about the Nintendo 64 games and the Switch Online service. Even games that are not initially included in the Nintendo 64 Online service are going to see a spillover effect from the games on the service dropping so harshly. The games like Mario Kart 64 and Super Mario 64, I absolutely expect us to see the higher end of these drops due to how popular they are and how common they are. If the game sold well, if the game was more popular, there's going to be more of them floating around. Any hit to the actual player demand is going to see the price drop a lot on these types of games. If we look at the games on the Super Nintendo Mini here that saw over 30% drop, they are all some of the most common games on the system, except for maybe Mega Man X. And when we look at the games down here that were not on the Super Nintendo Mini that also saw the biggest drops, it was some of the most popular games on the console. Once this Switch Online service for N64 and Sega Genesis comes out, I highly think we are going to see a sharp downturn in the prices, especially of the games included in the service, but also of some of the other most popular games on the consoles. If you have a counter argument to everything I've said or you disagree with something, please let me know in the comments. I would love to discuss this more with you guys. That's all I got for today. I'll see you guys next time.